This is a full story. Puppy wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. My boyfriend of 7 years said he no longer loves me, so I decisively broke up with him. Everyone thought I would be crying and begging for reconciliation. Later, it was him who came back with red eyes, asking to get back together. I broke up with Rockey. Actually, there had been signs that our relationship was in trouble for a long time. He slowly started to avoid taking calls in front of me, choosing to get up and close the door on the balcony. He began frequently making excuses about working late and no longer accompanied me for dinner. He also started vaguely rejecting my closeness. Most importantly, when I brought up the topic of marriage, he started to avoid answering, unlike his previous enthusiasm. I thought it was just a phase of emotional fatigue and that it would get better over time, until I received a mistakenly sent message from him on my phone. I seem to not love Haley anymore. Being together for too long can make you tired of it. I want to break up with her. The message was retracted in less than 5 seconds. He probably realized he sent it to the wrong person, but I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen it. In that moment, everything suddenly became clear. All his past actions became suddenly clear. He didn't love me anymore, and I accepted this fact in a very short time. Then I replied to him, "Rockey, let's break up." As soon as I sent the message, his call came through. I didn't even look at it and immediately hung up and turned off my phone. If it had been before, I would have patiently listened to his explanation. Even if I was angry, I would still forgive him. But this time it was different. I was clear-headed. What he said no longer mattered to me. I quickly packed my things, only taking what was originally mine. That same day, I moved into a small house. This house was bought by me. When I had just graduated from college, Rockey and I each participated in a significant project and earned a considerable commission. At that time, we were both working towards a shared future. A house and a car were necessary for marriage. In the end, we decided I would buy the house and he would buy the car. I remember when we picked up the car, it was a winter night with light rain. The streets were filled with red and green lights. The house was also successfully transferred that day. I sat in the passenger seat, flipping through the little red book over and over. Rockey smiled lightly, freeing one hand to hold mine. He said, "Haley, we have a home now." I looked at the lights outside the car window and thought that in the future there would be a light on late nights just for me. So I reached out and held his hand. Yes, we had a home. I touched the seat in front of me, a bit childishly possessive. "This seat is mine. No one else is allowed to sit here." He smiled again. "Okay, from now on, my passenger seat only belongs to you, and the little red book will change from a property deed to a marriage certificate." He also said, "I will always love you." His eyes were filled with sincerity. Later, we decorated the small house with wallpaper and hung up our photos. On the small balcony, there were rose seedlings he had run several miles to buy for me. The bedspread was chosen by him, in my favorite color. But how long is 7 years? I asked myself. I didn't find an answer, only realizing I had been crying at some point. I suddenly found that the wallpaper in the room had yellowed and peeled off. The balcony was empty, and the bedspread in the wardrobe was covered in mildew. The car, which had long been replaced due to age. The house had been empty for a long time because it was too small. Just like how my relationship with Rockey, due to the passage of time, had vanished into thin air. When I opened my eyes again, it was already noon the next day, and I was woken up by Alice's call. "Do you know what that jerk said? It makes me so mad." Alice's usual loud voice made me hold the phone away from my ear. I suddenly remembered I had told her about the breakup yesterday. Given her personality, she had probably gone to confront Rockey. Then she sent me the chat records between her and Rockey. Rockey said, "I'm tired of her. I'm annoyed by her nagging, by her complaining about trivial things after I'm exhausted from work every day, and by her forcing me to say good morning and good night every day. And her inexplicable tantrums. I don't want to comfort her. It's really tiring." Alice was furious and questioned him. "Why weren't you annoyed when she endured hardships with you? When she lived in a small house, wrote plans for you, and stayed up for days taking care of you when you were sick? Why weren't you annoyed then?" Rockey took a few minutes to reply. "Who asked her to do these things?" I thought I had completely given up. But when I saw this sentence, my heart still ached inexplicably. No one asked me to do these things. It was just my own wishful thinking. But Rockey seemed to have forgot that the things he now finds annoying were things he once coaxed me into doing. When we first got together in college, Rockey had many major courses. To talk to me more, he would cling to me during breaks and ask me to tell him everything that happened that day. From the moment I woke up in the morning to the very last second before we met, every detail. He said, listening to you makes me feel like I'm constantly a part of your life. I'm very happy. He also said, I want to be the first person to say good morning to you every day and the last to say good night. I can still remember the way he listened to me seriously while swallowing his bread. 7 years might truly be a long time. It has dusted and covered the affection of the boy who once squeezed out time to listen to me. He's not annoyed by those things. I smiled at Alice and said, he's just annoyed with me. Actually, I should have broken up with Rockey a long time ago. I was just deceiving myself. Last week, he came home reeking of alcohol after socializing. When I helped him lie down on the bed, his phone vibrated several times. I took a look. Serena's name popped up. I know her. Serena is Rockey's childhood friend. She went abroad in high school and seems to have returned recently. She said, thank you for spending my birthday with me. I'm very happy. I was stunned for a moment and couldn't help but scroll up through the chat history. Since Serena returned to the country, they have been chatting almost every day, but there didn't seem to be any improper messages. She occasionally shared good music with him, and Rockey shared what he ate each day. They chatted about everything from attending meetings to the button on his shirt falling off. They talked about everything. There was no ambiguous language, but the atmosphere was full of ambiguity. If I weren't Rockey's girlfriend, I would think this pair of young lovers had a really good relationship. In contrast, the most common topic in my and Rockey's chat history was whether he would be working overtime tonight, but his words and actions were no different from usual. He still worried about my health, concerned for my safety, but he didn't care about my mood or whether there were new boys around me. But I kept deceiving myself, thinking it was just the 7-year itch and that it would get better over time. We had been together for so long, how could he say he didn't love me anymore? But he didn't give me the chance to continue deceiving myself. Those 2 sentences were probably meant for Serena. He seemed to have complained about me to Serena more than once. But Serena always cutely scolded him for not appreciating it, saying that such a good girlfriend as Haley was hard to find, and he shouldn't be ungrateful. At the moment of breaking up, I didn't even know whom to blame. Rockey didn't cheat or betray me. He just didn't love me anymore, just shared his life and chatted with a younger girl. Serena didn't seem to be at fault either. She didn't intentionally flirt with Rockey. She was just sharing her life and chatting with a childhood friend. So, could I blame myself? I couldn't understand, but I understood that the desire to share is the highest form of love. If he no longer loves me, why should I cling on? I switched jobs and moved to a newly established small studio. I majored in fashion design at university while Rockey studied management. Because I always adjusted my plans to accommodate Rockey, I ended up working wherever he did. Now that we've broken up, it's better not to run into each other. I found the studio by chance in an alumni group. The founder is Tony, a senior 2 years ahead of me. It seems he decided to return to develop his career after studying abroad for a few years. Tony was the campus heartthrob back then, handsome, charming, and academically excellent. I was fortunate to work with him on several design showcases. He was very patient with everyone's designs, which is probably why he was so popular. I only applied to the studio on a whim, never expecting to be accepted the same afternoon. Considering how my grades were only decent among many outstanding students, it was quite surprising. Even more surprising was that he remembered me. The studio was small. When Tony walked in, he immediately looked at me. He gave a gentle smile. Long time no see, Haley. I was taken aback and asked, you remember me? He seemed to recall something amusing, and his eyes behind the gold-rimmed glasses crinkled with a smile. It's hard to forget that pajama outfit. A jolt of recognition hit me, and long-buried memories surged back. It was the day of our first design meeting. In addition to the freshman students and Tony, a few professors were invited. It was a formal occasion where dressing up was expected. However, I had stayed up until after 3 in the morning finishing over 20 sketches. The meeting was at 8 a.m., and I was undeniably late. Even though I wasn't fully awake, I knew it was an important event, so I applied my makeup with half-closed eyes. I even wore high heels. But in my carelessness, I hadn't combed my hair or changed out of my pajamas. So, at 8:05 a.m., everyone saw a girl in a pink Minnie Mouse pajama with messy hair, but a carefully made-up face and high heels standing at the door of the meeting room. I remember Tony laughing with his eyes twinkling like peach blossoms. Haley, you really are extraordinary. Even your aesthetic is refreshingly unique. There were a few teasing laughs in the small conference room. It wasn't mocking, but I still felt embarrassed, standing awkwardly at the door. My ears were burning with shame. At that moment, I understood why Alice had been so surprised and repeatedly asked if I was really wearing that before I left. I was just groggy and thought the outfit was comfortable, without realizing it was an issue. Tony laughed, but still stood up to nod at the professors. Please wait a moment, I'll take her to change. I could feel his restrained laughter as he led me away. Go ahead and laugh, it's already embarrassing enough, I said, feeling resigned. Starting off like this, I worried I would be mocked by my classmates and teachers in the future. He suddenly stopped and I almost bumped into his back. When he turned around, his smile was gone, replaced by a serious expression. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to mock you. I just found it a bit cute. If you mind, I apologize. His sudden formal tone threw me off balance. I touched my nose and said, I didn't mean that. He took me to the costume room and found a dress that was as casual as possible for me to change into. When we returned to the meeting room, I expected to be the subject of jokes. To my surprise, everyone acted as if nothing had happened and the meeting proceeded normally. Later, I learned that it was Tony who asked everyone not to mention it, fearing it would make me uncomfortable. I once mentioned this incident to Rockey and he laughed, patting my head, saying I was adorably clueless. Why am I thinking about Rockey again? I smiled wryly and looked up at Tony. Thank you for remembering. Once we're out of school, don't call me senior, just call me. Why? He turned and clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. To celebrate the new team member joining, we're going out for dinner tonight, my treat. The studio erupted in cheers, with more enthusiasm than expected. Yay! Tony, you're so generous. That evening, I drank a bit more, using the excuse of toasting. I'm not good with alcohol, but recently, I felt the need to vent my frustrations somehow. By the end of the dinner, I was moderately tipsy. My steps were a bit unsteady, and I almost stumbled over a small stone. Before I could fall, a pair of hands caught me. It was Tony. I thanked him softly. My ankle hurt a bit, but I could still walk. You seem unhappy, he stated. Yes, I answered bluntly. How could I be happy? My boyfriend of 7 years no longer loved me. He found my chatter annoying, disliked being forced to say good morning and good night, yet had a daily chat with a little sweetheart. Tony didn't say anything, his gaze searching the distance. I laughed at myself for being drunk and pouring out my troubles to my boss. I was about to turn and call a cab home when I suddenly saw a familiar figure. People often meet those they don't want to see, while those they long to see remain elusive. I sighed, feeling even more distressed. Across the street was Rockey, accompanied by a sweet and charming girl. If I'm not mistaken, it must be Serena. It was a small square with many vendors. Rockey was buying brownies with the girl. I used to love brownies. In college, every early autumn, without me saying a word, Rockey would buy brownies and wait for me downstairs. He would come running, one hand holding candy apples, the other holding hot milk tea, his eyes shining. He would chide me for dressing too lightly. Our coupledom was envied by everyone. My roommates would tease me, "Did your little boyfriend bring you brownies again?" But now, everything has changed. He was buying a delicious-looking brownie, but instead of running to me, he handed it to the girl beside him. The tenderness in his eyes towards Serena was something I had seen before. He used to look at me like that. Occasionally, when I forgot things, got lost, or couldn't finish my sketches, he would find me cute. Rockey smiled with his eyes still shining. But now, the person he looked at with such affection was Serena. My steps seemed frozen, unable to move. My emotions were tangled into a chaotic mess, but my mind was clearer than ever. I turned to leave, but was stopped by a hand. A bouquet of flowers appeared before me. They were roses. I looked at Tony behind the flowers, unable to process it. Tony, unusually flustered, with red-tipped ears, said, "I heard girls like receiving flowers." He offered the flowers forward. "Don't be unhappy. It's not good for you," Tony said, his smile gentle and eyes curved. "Senior Tony, you're really good at comforting girls," I joked. He adjusted his glasses, not replying, only smiling. "Thank you, I really like them," I said politely, accepting the flowers, and glanced back at Rockey. He saw me. As if to confirm my thoughts, his phone rang the next second. "Who are you with?" His voice was cold and questioning. He stood across the street, glaring at me as if interrogating me. I met his gaze directly. "If I'm not mistaken, we've broken up." He didn't speak, Serena looking between him and me. The flow of traffic came and went, and his figure was obscured by cars. "Go be with your little sweetheart," I said, my frustration making me unwilling to waste more words. The alcohol seemed to be affecting my head, making it ache. I rubbed my forehead. "You've been drinking?" He quickly noticed something was wrong with me. It was always like this. When I drank, I would get a headache. So, no matter the occasion, my glass was always filled with juice or milk. No matter how many people offered me drinks, he would shield me from them, blocking one drink after another. I worried about how much he drank, pulling his sleeve and whispering, "I can drink a little." His face was flushed, but his eyes were clear. "I can't bear to see you uncomfortable." But even someone who cared about me like that could end up finding me annoying. "It's none of your business. I'll take you home. I have painkillers in the car. I can get you a hot towel." "Rockey," I interrupted him, "stop pretending. It was you who wanted to break up." I had always been confident in our relationship. Never did I think there would be a reason for us to break up. But I didn't expect the reason to be so simple. Just because he no longer loved me, he shifted his affection and life to someone else. I hung up the phone. Tony handed me a tissue. I was afraid you might cry. I shook my head and smiled. I shouldn't cry. It's not worth it. He looked at me meaningfully before retracting the tissue. I'll take you home. It's not safe to be alone after drinking. I didn't refuse, sitting in the car, staring out the window in a daze. The shops on both sides of the street were lit up with colorful lights. But there would no longer be a light left on for me. The studio was particularly busy because it was in its early stages and had taken on a small design showcase. Promotion, design, and sample making couldn't be neglected. During this time, Rockey kept showing up around me, either intentionally or unintentionally. He posted on social media about where he ate and what he did each day. Occasionally, he'd receive packages and ask if they were mine and if I needed him to bring them to me. After several instances, I lost all patience and simply blocked his social media. I sent him a final message: whether it's mine or not, I don't need it, just handle it. Then, I never looked at his reply again, immersing myself fully in work. During this period, I practically lived at the studio, but each time I worked late into the night, Tony would always wait to be the last one to drive me home, under the pretense of ensuring employee safety. Every morning, everyone's desk had a breakfast. I thought to myself, are the employee benefits here really this good? Another senior told me that it wasn't the case before, and it seemed to have started only after I joined. I was skeptical, but didn't have time to think too much. After working overtime and sleepless nights for over a week, the showcase ended successfully, and, as expected, I fell ill with a high fever of 39 degrees Celsius. Alice was called over late at night. She scolded me while making me take medicine and prepared porridge. I'm not very good at cooking, so just make do with it. She carefully brought me some lean meat porridge, not forgetting to scold me. In this quiet little house, her busy chatter somehow brought some warmth. Alice was scrolling through her phone beside me when she suddenly said, "Tisk." I leaned over to see it was Rockey's new social media post. The photo was of a bowl of clear soup noodles, with a mutual friend teasing below, "Again, is this for the sister-in-law?" He replied with a no. I remembered that Rockey used to be unable to cook, not even distinguishing between salt and sugar. It was later, after graduating from college, that I, just like tonight, suddenly developed a high fever. Unable to buy hot food in the middle of the night, he had to cook himself. After taking the medicine, I fell asleep in a daze, only to be woken by the clattering sounds. Rockey was watching a video tutorial while clumsily searching for a pot lid. His fingertips were wrapped with 2 band-aids. I helplessly walked over, took the spatula from his hand, and quickly made some porridge. He stood behind me with a look of grievance. I asked how he hurt his fingers, and he was too embarrassed to admit it was from the spatula. I couldn't help but laugh at his clumsiness, wondering how someone could get injured by a spatula. He scratched his head awkwardly, determined to learn good cooking skills. But he really lacked the talent for cooking, and after several months, he could barely make a bowl of clear soup noodles with a fried egg. Yet even I rarely had the chance to eat the noodles he made. So, who was he making this bowl of noodles for tonight? Serena? It should be her. I remembered from our chat records that she mentioned wanting to eat the noodles he made. I took a couple of big mouthfuls of porridge, feeling warmth in my stomach, but my eyes started to feel a bit moist. I took 2 days of sick leave from Tony. He said that due to his reason, an excellent employee had worked too hard, and he should take responsibility. So he gave me 3 days of paid leave. I didn't expect Tony to come to visit. After the fever subsided, I still felt cold and wrapped up tightly. When I opened the door for Tony, I was still wearing the pink Minnie Mouse pajamas I had on before. He saw me and laughed. "So Haley, you're so dedicated to each piece of clothing." I was helpless and had to invite him in. "Why is Boss Tony taking the time to visit me? Are you feeling better?" "Much better." I sniffed, still showing some cold symptoms. I brought some ginger tea, some fruit, and I stopped by a flower shop on the way but didn't find roses, so I bought sunflowers instead. I left them here. Only then did I notice he was carrying quite a few things in his hands. But I found it odd last time. Few people know that I like roses. How did he know? "Last time you had a headache, I asked a friend to get some painkillers. They have fewer side effects, but you can't take them too often. You should rest more." He began to fuss. I still felt something was off. "Does Tony do this for every employee?" I asked tentatively. "No," he answered crisply, "only for you." This time, it was my turn to be stunned. He smiled again, "But don't feel troubled. I'm just expressing my feelings." He wasn't wearing glasses today, and his eyes seemed even clearer, with a determined and focused look. I felt awkward, lowered my head, and avoided eye contact with him, laughing awkwardly. "Boss Tony really knows how to joke." "I'm not joking. I really like you, and I have for a long time." In the following days, I continued to go to work and come home as usual. My desk still had a breakfast every day, but this time, no one else received it. He still waited for me every day after work and drove me home. It seemed that after that day, he was more open and no longer used the excuse of caring for employees. I, however, felt a bit distressed. The 7-year relationship had just ended, and I wasn't ready to start liking someone new. I could let go of Rockey, but it was hard to let go of the 7 years of memories. That youthful love that occupied me and was so full of innocence, I didn't know how long it would take to get over. I made an effort to keep my distance, but Tony seemed to ignore it. "There's a gathering tonight, come with me." Tony came up behind me at some point and spoke softly. I instinctively wanted to refuse, but he spoke first. "There will be several design industry teachers. I'll introduce you to them." After hesitating for a while, I still decided to go. I couldn't give up the chance to learn more just because of personal issues, but I didn't expect Rockey to be there. Only then did I find out that Rockey was one of the investors in the last design showcase. Since the last time I replied to his message, it seemed he hadn't bothered me again. He looked unwell, as if he had lost weight. From the moment I pushed the door into the private room, he kept staring at me. Maybe he was looking at me, or maybe he was looking at Tony. In any case, he radiated an aura of dissatisfaction. Tony only looked slightly surprised when he first entered, but quickly adjusted his expression and continued to introduce the teachers as usual. Out of courtesy, I had to stand up and toast each person. As I was about to raise my glass of red wine, I saw Rockey buttoning up his suit, ready to stand up. I knew him well enough to recognize his intention to block the alcohol for me. I frowned slightly, hesitating about how to refuse him. A hand quickly pressed down my wine glass and handed me a cup of tea. I looked up. It was Tony. He smiled and explained, "Girls can't drink alcohol, so I'm substituting tea for wine." The teachers didn't make it difficult and nodded in agreement, even teasing. "But we haven't seen you bring any girl to dinner before. Are you having impure motives?" Tony laughed again. "It's fine to joke about me, but Haley is shy. If you keep teasing her, she might run away." The teachers laughed, saying, "If you can't catch her, don't blame us." Although the teachers were all over 50, they were still spirited and lively, and the gathering lasted until midnight. Rockey had a sullen face throughout, drinking silently and saying nothing. Finally, as the event was ending, I hadn't even gotten up when Rockey stopped me. "I need to talk to you." His eyes were filled with drunkenness, and his voice was hoarse. I didn't want to get entangled. "I have nothing to say to you, Haley." He lowered his head, his brows full of disappointment as he softly pleaded, "Please talk to me." He knew I was most susceptible to his pleas. In the past, whenever he made me angry, he would snuggle into my arms like a puppy, rubbing his head against my palm, and keep calling me, "Haley, Haley, talk to me. I'm sorry, please talk to me." I glanced at the restaurant entrance. Tony was still saying goodbye to the teachers. I sat back down, sighed lightly. "Say it. Are you feeling better? I heard you had a fever. Are you still having a headache? I bought your usual medicine. Can I bring it to you when you get home?" His tone was almost pleading. I didn't respond, keeping my eyes on my phone. He moved a bit closer. "Dear, don't be angry. I don't really want to break up with you. I just don't really want to break up, but really find me annoying." I looked up at him. "That's not what I mean. Rockey, I thought we would get married. We had been together since our sophomore year in college, making it 7 years now. We graduated together, bought a house and a car together, worked together, and lived together. I would save up money for months to surprise him with that pair of sneakers he liked for his birthday. He would take a long car ride on New Year's Eve just to reach my hometown to wish me a happy new year. He remembered that I liked roses, and I remembered that he loved basketball. Our love seemed to be heading for a perfect ending if we just kept going. But he stopped, let go of my hand, and started admiring flowers other than roses. I suddenly didn't know whether to blame him. He was just admiring, not touching or picking, but that admiration was supposed to be unique, mine alone. Wasn't there any other men around me on this journey? Yet I didn't spare a glance at any of them who showed me interest. I wouldn't share my daily menu with others, report my itinerary, or stop to pick up a basketball on the side of the road. I could forgive him for making me angry, for being late for dates. Even last year, I forgave him for forgetting Valentine's Day. But Rockey, I called him again, full of disappointment. "You've started liking other flowers. I won't contact her anymore. I won't look at anyone else. Let's reconcile, okay? Don't go with anyone else. Let's go home. I made you some noodles. Try them." Rockey rarely spoke so humbly. He was usually proud and self-centered. The version of him that found me annoying and had a bad temper was his true self. I realized for the first time that he was also hypocritical. I was probably blinded by love in the past. I sneered, "Rockey, don't pretend to be humble. It doesn't suit you." Tony walked in at that moment, sensing the awkward atmosphere in the room. He rarely frowned, came in, picked up my coat, and nodded to signal us to leave. I stood up to head out, and then I heard Rocky's voice again, as if he was saying something to Tony. I couldn't catch the words clearly, so I turned back to ask, but Tony only smiled and didn't answer. It wasn't until I was in the back seat of his car that he suddenly spoke up. Last time you wanted to ask me why I liked you, right? Do you remember rescuing a kitten during college? That kitten was mine. To say I rescued it is a bit of an exaggeration. I just helped the kitten a little. It was during the final exams of my freshman year, before Rocky and I got together. One night I was suddenly hungry, so I went to the convenience store in my pajamas. But summer rains are always sudden. As soon as I stepped out of the store, it started pouring. I thought to myself that luckily I always carried an umbrella, or I'd miss the dorm curfew. But before I could open the umbrella, I heard weak meows from a corner nearby. I was puzzled because pets weren't allowed on campus. As I moved closer to check, I saw a white ragdoll kitten, probably only a few months old, lying on the ground, barely conscious. Its fur was soaked from the rain, and it didn't have the strength to move. Ragdoll cats are known to be delicate, and it wasn't a stray cat. I looked around but didn't see anyone. Whose little one are you? Did you get lost? I spoke gently as I carefully carried it to a chair outside the convenience store. The little thing seemed to be shivering from the cold, its voice trembling. I took off my pajama jacket and wrapped it around the kitten, then went back to the store to buy some water and ham to feed it. I'm leaving now, little one. Stay safe and wait for your owner to find you. I gave its head a final pat, and it meowed a few times. So what happened to the kitten? I asked him. It died. He gripped the steering wheel, and I saw his expression darken in the rearview mirror. I took it to the hospital as soon as I found it the next day, but it was too late. It had been sick for a long time, and there was no cure. That night, it probably knew it was going to leave, so it ran out, not wanting me to see it in such a state. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. I should thank you. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have even seen it one last time. I remained silent, looking down, when something suddenly came to mind. So how did you know it was mine? That pajama. I was taken aback. Pajama? There was a little one on the hem of the pajama. You had the same. Tony was right, it was one of my habits. Sewing a little wand on the hem of clothes I liked. It's amazing that we met again. You're just as I imagined, cute and clueless, but kind and hardworking. Falling for you was something I expected, but I hadn't had a chance to say it before I heard you had a boyfriend. He looked up through the rearview mirror at me. I couldn't see his smile, but I guessed he was smiling. You don't have to rush to reject me. Take your time to let go of your 7 years. And I've waited 7 years. I'm not in a hurry. I'll keep waiting for you. I didn't respond, just turned to look out of the car window at the dim streetlights. What did you and Rocky talk about just now? I tried to change the subject. He told me to stay away from you. I sighed in exasperation. He was still the same childish guy. I didn't agree. Tony's smile faded, and he became unusually serious. If he doesn't cherish you, then I'll. Since that gathering, Rocky has been waiting for my work hours every day to drive me home. Every few days he brings small gifts, maybe flowers, small handmade trinkets, or little pieces of jewelry. Even though I haven't acknowledged any of it, he still asks me out to dinner every weekend. The things he used to find annoying, he now does without fail. He actively says good morning and good night, updates me on his plans, and shares the little things of his day. I found it amusing that he's now doing the very things he once sneered at. The breakup seemed to have reached my parents' ears. They each took turns trying to convince me, saying Serena was just a little sister and that those words were just youthful quarrels. My mother couldn't understand. We had argued and talked about breaking up before, but why couldn't we reconcile this time? So the situation clearly turned into a three-person versus me. But Rocky himself knew it wasn't a typical argument. Otherwise, he wouldn't have put aside his pride and nearly begged for reconciliation that day. He always knew what I was thinking, but he still did it. He knows best whether he truly still loves me or just doesn't want to break up. I still remember when he confessed to me in our sophomore year. I wished for milk tea, and he immediately ran half the campus to buy it and waited downstairs at my dorm. His forehead was covered in sweat, and he was out of breath. I asked him why he ran. Why not just order delivery? He smiled foolishly and said I liked it with ice, and delivery would be too slow, it would have melted by then. I laughed at his silliness and asked if he had any wishes I could help fulfill. He suddenly became serious, his ears turning red, and hesitantly asked if he could be with me. That day the sun was especially glaring, casting a halo on his face. I inexplicably nodded, and thus began our relationship. The breakup actually felt surreal. 7 years of love could truly end just like that. The bond between people is so fragile, how can it snap so easily? But I don't want to hold on any longer. So when Rocky asked me out for dinner for what felt like the umpteenth time this month, I agreed. He seemed very happy, suggesting we go to the newly opened Thai restaurant. I remained unusually calm and just casually chose a beef noodle shop. In the midst of the noisy crowd, he looked at me nervously. I asked him, on New Year's Eve this year, after we fought, "Where did you go?" He looked startled, as if he knew what I was about to say. Every New Year's has been spent together, but that day he insisted on attending a party. I was unhappy and threw a fit, and he didn't appease me but stormed out instead. 2 hours later, he returned with a small cake and a bouquet of baby's breath. I thought he had just gone out to calm down and then came back. I was pleased. After all, he couldn't bear to see me sad. But when I checked our chat history that day, I found out he had gone to see Serena. The baby's breath and strawberry cake were Serena's favorites. Serena had happened to be out of town, so he came back home. "Rocky, don't come looking for me anymore." I gave him my final ultimatum. "Let's leave each other some dignity." He still looked unwilling. "So you chose Tony, huh? What's so good about him?" I frowned, still caught up in his childish tantrum, trying to use Tony as an excuse to lessen his own guilt for changing his heart. I had trusted him too much, trusted his love too much, so I couldn't see his true nature. I suddenly felt like I was blind, treating him as my perfect lover. "I don't love you anymore, Rocky. Don't show up in front of me again. Whether I choose Tony or not, that's my business. We've been broken up for a long time." As I said this, my voice started to crack and my nose felt sore. I hadn't wanted to cry in front of him. I prided myself on being calm and rational. Leaving was decisive and swift, and seeing him again didn't bring the supposed heartache. Even if he appeared with Serena or begged me to reconcile after a gathering, I never let him see my vulnerable side. But when I cried and told him I didn't love him anymore, I realized how deeply I had loved him in the past. Did he also tell Serena about the forever he once promised me? When he celebrated Valentine's Day and New Year with me, was he also thinking of his little sweetheart? The more I loved him, the harder it was to let go of those 7 years, and the more I resented Serena's presence. The more I resented the harsh words he said to me. Even after the breakup, I never flirted with anyone or spoke ill of him. Why couldn't he do the same in a relationship? He quietly stopped moving forward with me, crossed the fence to pick flowers outside the yard, and then looked back disdainfully at the roses that once accompanied him. His gaze was no longer only on me in the yard. For the first time after the breakup, I strongly realized that I no longer loved him, and finally completely let go of the love I once had so passionately. Totally let go of the 7 years with him. Rocky never showed up again. He probably figured things out. I finally breathed a sigh of relief after being entangled in his life. Tony, however, continued as usual, never missing breakfast, afternoon tea, or daily care. If I wore high heels all day the previous day, there would be a box of Band-Aids on my desk the next day. If there was a dinner party I had to attend, he would always block the alcohol for me. He used my alcohol allergy as an excuse to intercept all the drinks handed to me. Whenever I attended any event with him, everyone tacitly let me substitute tea for alcohol. He seemed to take care of me in every way, but there was no inappropriate behavior. As he said, he wasn't in a hurry at all. Until one day, I was rear-ended on the highway during a business trip and had a car accident. It wasn't serious, just some bruises on my arm and head. The owner of the offending vehicle was very reasonable and covered all my medical expenses. The doctor suggested I stay in the hospital for observation overnight, and since my work was done, I thought it was better to be cautious. I don't know if it was because I was tired from driving during the day, but I fell asleep early that night. I didn't even realize my phone had died and turned off. The next morning, when I turned on my phone, there were dozens of missed calls from Tony. I cautiously called back and it was almost instantly answered. "Where are you?" His tone was very anxious. I calmly provided the hospital and room number. In less than half an hour, he appeared at my bedside. I even suspected he had run here. Otherwise, how could he be breathing so heavily? "Where are you hurt?" I pointed to my arm and forehead. "Anywhere else?" I shook my head. After confirming I was fine, he seemed to change his face instantly, looking very serious. "Why didn't you answer my calls? Why didn't you realize your phone was off? Do you know how worried I was? Do you know I couldn't find you?" I was stunned by his string of questions. He seemed angry. It was the first time I had seen him lose his temper since I knew him. Was it because he was worried about me? I said a bit apologetically, "I'm fine." "If you're fine this time, what about next time? Why didn't you tell me?" His frowning expression was a bit rare, and I couldn't help but smile. "You're still smiling?" He stared at me incredulously. "Do I need to hurt you to teach you a lesson?" Yes, he was worried about me. I was so sure of it. I saw a kind of affection unique to me in his eyes. Even someone as mature and steady as him would be flustered and disordered by something as trivial as this. He would rush to me without regard for anything. I pretended to be in pain and let out a light hiss. He immediately reacted, quickly walking to my side, full of concern, and softly asked where it hurt. I looked up and saw the sunlight was blocked out and a cool breeze blew in. I said, "Why, I'm fine." His hand's movement froze, and he stood there dumbfounded. From the first day he saw me in the studio, he asked me not to call him a senior. But I didn't listen. My way of keeping a distance was to avoid using too close forms of address. I had been with Rockey for 7 years, and he had tried to get me to call him husband. I didn't agree. To me, this title didn't belong to anyone before getting the marriage certificate. And after breaking up with him, the address changed from a baby to Rockey. Even though Tony had expressed his feelings, I still called him a senior and a boss. But he really seemed to like me. I should start a new life now. I should accept a new person into my life, starting with this address, saying goodbye to my 7 years. Extra, Rockey. Haley broke up with me. This was something I had been vaguely expecting, but it felt like it came too suddenly. 7 years of romance, just like that, over? Until Alice came to question me, my repressed dissatisfaction suddenly erupted. I said many harsh words. From passionate romance to the mundane of daily life, my relationship with Haley had become so bland that I began to harbor complaints. Serena came to comfort me after learning about it. She's the little neighbor girl I grew up with. It's undeniable that I had a vague crush on her when we were younger. And now, in the gradually wearying relationship of 7 years, she reappeared. She gave me a different feeling from Haley. She's youthful, lively, and cute. She would be playful in our chats and use emoticons when speaking. I couldn't help but stop and look at her during my long romance with Haley. But Haley seemed to notice. Later, when a message was sent to her by mistake and she immediately broke up with me, I wasn't surprised. At that moment, I sighed with relief, thinking I could finally escape this dull life. But things didn't turn out as I expected. After the breakup, Haley resigned, and I didn't see her for almost half a month. The ease I imagined after the breakup didn't come. Instead, coming home to an empty house made me feel lost. I thought it was just temporary, but when I went out shopping with Serena and saw a brownie cake, I still thought of Haley. She was like a greedy little hamster, always stuffing her cheeks full. In early autumn, she didn't like to wear much clothing, always just draping a thin coat before going downstairs. So, I nagged her a lot. Her emotions were all written on her face, but if she was unhappy, a brownie cake would make it better. I couldn't control my steps and instinctively reached for a string of cakes to hand to the person next to me. Hearing Serena's sweet "thank you," I only then realized the person beside me was not Haley. I suddenly missed her and regretted it a bit. So, I looked up and saw her across the busy street, with the guy I recognized. Haley had once attended a design showcase with him. His name seemed to be Tony. A surge of inexplicable anger welled up in my heart, and I couldn't help but call her. But her voice was cold and unfeeling, refusing to say another word. I watched her leave with Tony, my heart in a mess. It turned out I still cared about her being with someone else. I always thought that the love I was already tired of was just my immaturity. I still couldn't let go of her. I started to be unaccustomed to the empty pillow beside me, unaccustomed to not receiving her evening messages asking if I needed to work late, unaccustomed to not having her cling to me, talking about trivial matters, and unaccustomed to not hearing her insist on saying good morning and good night. These things I once thought were redundant had really disappeared, and I began to miss them. Is that how people are? Only realizing the value of things after losing them. Seeing a new man giving her flowers, I regretted it. That should have been me. I also heard she was ill. So, I made an effort to attend a gathering that didn't really need me. The friend was an investor in her design showcase, so I grabbed the opportunity to see her. But she was still with Tony. I tried hard to control my temper, gently coaxing her. She was always more receptive to soft words than harsh ones, and I thought she would forgive me like before. But she didn't. She called me Rockey and said she thought we would get married. She never used to call me Rockey. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. I also thought we would get married. How did we end up like this? I actually know best. I also understand most clearly whether Serena was a sister or a romantic interest to me. I never really thought about being with Serena. I was just finding an emotional refuge in this relationship I considered dull. This feeling was not love, but indeed more than friendship. I still didn't want to give up. I began to cling to Haley, frequently buying her gifts and asking her out for meals. She never acknowledged me once. So, when she agreed to have a meal with me a month later, I was even somewhat taken aback. She casually chose a beef noodle shop. As soon as we sat down, she asked if I remembered New Year's this year. I instantly knew what she was going to say. After our argument that night, my impulse to break up reached an extreme. I slammed the door and wanted to find comfort with Serena. But I forgot she was on a business trip, so I drove aimlessly. When stopped at a red light, I suddenly saw a cake shop that was still open. I stared at it for a while, then got out to buy one, and bought a bouquet of flowers next door. But all that was left were baby's breath. When I got home, she ran over crying and hugged me, saying she thought I didn't want her anymore. She was as sad as when she now said she didn't love me with a crying tone. She rarely cried, but now her eyes were red, clearly crying for me. But her eyes clearly showed she no longer loved me. At that moment, I truly understood why she was unwilling to forgive me. In our smooth-sailing relationship, I betrayed her. I scorned her love, disregarded her efforts, even planted another flower beside her. I clearly understood she had really given up on me. Regret filled my mind, but it was already too late. After that, I never appeared again. I didn't get together with Serena either. After that gathering, we lost contact. I changed jobs, cars, and even houses. I moved to another city, hoping for a new life. But I haven't dated anyone for many years, because at the time when my love was pure and passionate, she had appeared. I had given all my romance to her, and since then, I haven't had the strength to love anyone else. The end.